Welcome to Tech Simplified, and my name is Sly Gittins, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Stacy Mayer. She is the best-selling author of Promotions Made Easy, Step by Step to Get You in the Executive Suite, because you know I'm trying to get there too. So I'm so excited to have you on here. I don't want to steal your thunder, Stacy. Would you please share your background and journey to becoming a rock star executive coach for women?
Sly, thank you so much. This is amazing. I'm super excited to be here and really just thrilled to be on this journey of life, right? And how I got here is such a roundabout, way of twists and turns. I was an actress in New York City, working on stage and moonlighting at a hedge fund. And instead of waiting tables, that's what I decided to do to make money. And then that's also where I met some of the most powerful women, female executives that I had ever seen or experienced in my life. I didn't have a lot of people that I was surrounded with at that caliber, at that quality of success in their careers and in their life. And so when I transitioned out to Palo Alto, California, I really fell in love with coaching and learning how can I really work with these women to help them advance their careers. And I noticed that there were a couple of things that were happening for women in particular that didn't have as much to do with the universal story that we were hearing about women in leadership, which is more about leaning in, ask for it, put yourself out there. And I was like, these women are really amazing, extraordinary, phenomenal, confident women who are asking for it, right? They are asking for the promotions, but there's got to be something missing here. And so that's been my investigation in the last 10 years is really how to get women promoted, paid, get that, voice at the table, because we don't want the title without the voice. We don't want to just have a title and not be included in the conversation. So that's what I've been focused on and really helping women, and thank you for helping us as well and amplifying our voices.
Well, yeah, that's first of all, that's fantastic, and it's definitely needed, right? Because you look at the numbers, women in those executive roles are far few between. Women, minority women is even fewer. So I think it's an area where you really can do a lot of good at transforming, those boardrooms, right? Because when you transform the executive layer, that trickles down to the bottom, right? So then, you're going to start populating more women that already was qualified, but
Yeah.
now also sometimes they're not the best evangelists of themselves, right? And you can give them skills to, they can bring those skills out of them. So that's pretty awesome. And it's kind of one thing I want to do with Tech Simplified and the Women in Tech series is just like you said, finding women like yourself and amplifying your story, because there's someone listening to this right now who wants to take that next step, who wants to go from middle management to the executive, or there might be a strong individual contributor making that pivot into the management world that listening to this can help them, right? Or maybe it's a girl right now who's wondering, like, maybe I want to be an executive, right? Maybe I want to be the next billionaire, right? How do I do that? Can I do that? Right? Let's alleviate those questions of can and say, yes, you can. This is how you do it. So thank you again for being on here. And I'm just happy to be an ally and be able to just help in a way I think I can by just sharing more stories. So this kind of perfectly kind of goes right into my next question is, what is your passion, Stacey?
Well, you kind of named it. We look at the statistics of women in leadership, and I have heard those statistics. I don't find the statistics themselves to be incredibly motivating in the sense of like, oh, we need to change those numbers and we need to make sure that those numbers go up consistently. What I am more motivated by is the individual woman and really person by person. And are they bettering their life? And one of the parts of that equation is if they're overqualified for their role, they're feeling uncomfortable on a regular basis because they're smarter than everybody else in the room. There's this feeling like I should be doing something more. I'm qualified. I'm ready to do something more, but I'm not equally compensated for that, like as if I did something along the line wrong in my negotiation or didn't ask for it and those types of things. And so when I look at the statistics, what I tell the women that I work with is those statistics mean that you have really terrible role models.
Yeah.
So it means that the people who are in the leadership suite don't look, think, act, and talk like you, right? So they might be brilliant human beings. That's fine. But what got them there is not going to get you there, right? We have a different set of rules. And so I really want to show women that, hey, this is not necessarily your fault. This is a system that has been set up not to necessarily elevate your voice. And we have an opportunity to negotiate for ourselves and what I always say is like educate the leadership team on our value. Because, okay, fine. I interviewed a woman for my podcast recently, and she was like, let them underestimate me. I am fine with that, right? Instead of being like, why are they underestimating me? Like, what's wrong with me? And really showing the woman, look, there is literally nothing wrong with you. But what we need are the skills to be able to engage in those conversations. And I know we're going to talk about that today and give women some stuff to really take, or actually literally anybody listening to take away and to say, how do we engage in those higher level conversations to say, hey, I'm an executive. I am ready now.
Yeah. And it shows. You can tell the passion just talking about it. And you're right. I think sometimes if you don't have representation or a role model, sometimes you don't get the clear guidance. You might get passed on because you don't look like the person there. And I know it's different, but being a minority, I can definitely empathize from that because I get into those similar conversations too. I'm like, I get in those kind of like, Sly, I want to be an executive. Well, you're a really good tech. I'm like, all right. I'm reading, I'm telling them right now, I'm reading Harvard Business Essentials, financial managers, right? I love cash flow statements. I run businesses. This is I built this, myself. Like I structured it, I got budgets, I got planning, they got review cycles. I'm like, I tell my manager, I'm like, yeah, I'm also good at tech, but I also could do these skills. And sometimes I wonder is like, do they even look at me in that capacity, right? So, I found like you can stay there and like that's not fair, or you can have the skills that it's almost they can't not pass you up because the skills are there, right? So, and this goes kind of perfect into our next question is why shouldn't you wait for the next performance review to get promoted, and what should you do instead? Because I find as an individual contributor, right? You want to get promoted. I'm pretty good at vocalizing like, hey, these are what I did to get my next job. But I find friends who will be in the same role for 10 years and they've been waiting to get promoted, but it never comes because they never pretty much speak up for themselves and showcase their value to the business. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. One is I want to first point out what you said, which is, I think they don't see me that way, right? They see me as a tech. And the answer is that's actually true, right? And what that does is it depersonalizes what you're quote unquote doing wrong. So in your brain, you're saying, hey, I'm doing all these things. Like I've started these businesses. I have ambition. I know how to run on the leadership side as well as the tech side. Isn't that amazing? But the truth is they don't see you that way yet. So that doesn't mean that you're not qualified, that you're not ready. They just don't see you. So what we're going to start to do is show them that we're operating at that executive level. My flagship program is called Executive Ahead of Time, how we become that executive ahead of time. And one of the ways we do that is to stop waiting for our performance review to advocate for ourselves and to engage in these higher level conversations. So when you're waiting for your performance review, regardless of if it has a positive outcome or not, like regardless of if you get the promotion you wanted or the pay increase or the, exceptional markings on your performance review, regardless of any of that, when you're waiting for your performance review, you're acting as an individual contributor because you're basically saying my job speaks for itself. Did I hit my marks? Did I make my deadlines? Did I do a good job, quote unquote, right? And so you could be at the vice president level and be acting this way, right? Like it's totally, it's like irregardless of title, a lot of times we can still be treated as the knowledge worker, the person who gets paid for our hours that we put in, right? Our output, right? And so when we're waiting for a performance review, we're not engaging in what I would call higher level, executive level conversations, right? These are back and forth conversations that we're having with people. So for instance, in your example slide, what you would do instead of shaking them harder, saying, hey, don't you see I have all this business acumen and I can do all these great things. What you do is you take one of your conversations that are already happening, like a tech where you're talking about your knowledge and your expertise. And then you say, you know why I'm able to figure this out so fast. And they're like, what? And then you're like, it's because I've been doing this for 10 years. And actually, I have a different approach to it than all the other techs on my team. Right? Really? You do, huh? And you're like, yeah, because this is how I think. Yeah. Right. And I call this process showing your work. And so where we're showing the behind the scenes, how we make decisions, how we came up with those ideas. And so you're doing that in a way, it's not like, oh, I want them to accept me and approve me, but we're showing up as a person who does things differently than the other people that we work with. We're setting ourselves apart. And you do that all year round. You don't do it at performance review time when you're like trying to, fight around the numbers or things like that.
Well, that's great. That's fantastic.
Do it.
You got me excited because now I feel like I'm proactive now. I'm not waiting. Right.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I feel like I'm always defensive. Look, I read this book here. I do this here. I'm in these courses. I already
and so to that end, then you say, hey, I'm having a conversation with Tim and I'm going to tell him, hey, you know what, Tim, I read this book here and I was thinking about XYZ when I read that book and one of the things that we're working on versus retroactively, hey, but I read this book here, right? Okay. They're two totally different things.
Okay.
And then they're sort of like, oh, Sly, cares about learning. He's educated, right? He has ideas. Maybe we should bring him into this conversation.
Yeah. And that's great because it's something you said earlier, what got you here won't get you there. That's a really good book, right?
Yeah, it's a great book.
That's kind of something I had to learn because I went from individual contributor to a director, but never made the switch mentally of being a director, right? So, and you can see how that turned out. I didn't last that long, right? Because I didn't make the switch mentally for it. Then when I had some time to rewind, I'm like, all right, these are some areas I could have done better. So that definitely makes sense. Before we go to the next question, I want to ask you another question. I talked to a lot of college students or early in their career, and they said, well, can I broach these conversations early in my career? Or is this someone who's more mid-career and senior career who can have these conversations?
Well, yeah, even better, right? So the first thing that I notice, and so let's clarify what by conversations you mean. And what I teach is engaging with the executive team. So we just recently in our conversation today talked about one-on-ones like with your boss and performance review, right? Yeah. And so, if you're early in your career, who are you meeting with? Your boss and your team, right? So yeah, of course you can engage in those conversations. But the sweet spot is how do you engage in conversations with executives, with other leaders at your organization, with mentors, with people that you admire? And that's where it really starts to get good is when you can do that. And I actually had a conversation at Haas Business School here in Berkeley, at UC Berkeley. And it broke my heart a little bit. You talk about my passion. And these young college students are like, oh, I could never meet with that person. I can't meet with that person. And so there's a little bit of insecurity there, which sort of says, who am I? And then we also have to remember that these walls have been put up for a reason, right? Like, so executive leadership are protected in some way, right? Like they're like, oh, you don't do that. You don't reach out to that person. That's not what we do. Why are those walls up? Well, one, you could say it's because of, the patriarchy or gender or whatever. Like we want to separate ourselves as leaders. But really, I think even more so is to separate ourselves as leaders, because at the executive level, you have to protect your energy and you can't have a bunch of individual contributors running up to you all the time, sucking your time away, right? Like really, if we kind of just look at it for what it is, it's set up that way. So what you're going to do instead is first say to yourself, I am worthy. I can meet with any person. I am a human being. They are a human being. We are allowed to engage in conversation. Then, because we're smart and we're not just going to be like, well, why won't they meet with me? We're going to say, hey, you know what? I know that you don't normally meet with people like me, meaning people like at this level or whatever, right? You don't meet with people not on your team, right? And so then you're going to actually say that up front. This is why I think it'd actually be great for you to meet with me. And then we're going to have a conversation, right? So again, that's the executive ahead of time. You're acting like an executive leader. You're acknowledging that these barriers are put in place, not because you're less than them, but because they need to protect their energy. So you're like, oh, I'm going to continue to protect your energy. But I also want to engage in conversation with you.
Yeah, that's great. And I know earlier in my career, I guess I don't have that fear of people. I think titles are titles. I talk to the CEO as fast as I talk to the
Yeah,
GM, right?
that's smart.
I remember when I was at my first job, and like the VP of the whole entire US, and this is like a global company, right? And he came down and he had like the town hall. First thing he looks at is the systems. And I'm like, why would he do that? When I saw him afterwards, I went up to him and I'm like, hey, such and such. You said this during the town hall meeting, but you never provided any context. And why do you do that? He said, the system's got to be operational, right? That's how we get paid on. So I got to see the books. So I have to check the system as soon as I start. I'm like, all right, that makes sense. And then I introduced myself. And then he's like, hey, tell me a little bit more about yourself, because no one ever asked. That's a really good question. No one ever asked me questions.
Yeah.
Right. And then, he told me about his family. He goes fishing and everything. So the next day he came in, he went past my manager, everyone else. Slide, what's going on, man?
How's Molly doing? You did it. That's it.
And then, they were like, how do you know him? So it's just be fun.
You're like, I talked to him.
Yeah, I just went
like, that's
ask him
it.
a question. No one ever thought to ask, actually listen to what he says, then ask him a question. Even now, in my job at Microsoft, we had an auction where you can buy time from executives, right? And they donate the time for charities, right? So for me, I found all the VPs. I even tried to put in one for Satya, but it went up to $3,000. I'm like, man, I don't got $3,000 for this to have a conversation, So, but I ended up finding the VPs of HR and all these, and I won the bids and everything. And I made sure they came with my questions prepared, and I asked my questions. That's how I got this finance book. Oh, Sly, you should take a look at this. Hey, dude, I can talk to you already. You seem like you're really good. You need to talk to your higher level. Go reach out to the VP. He actually told me to meet VP of my department, talk to her directly, and send her a message. Let her know your aspirations, so then she knows where you want to go, right? And then, but again, sometimes for me, I look at it as, what happens if I don't have the conversation? Right? Not what happens if I have a conversation. If I don't have the conversation, they don't know who I am. And once the leadership or executive team know who you are, you go from being a number on a spreadsheet to a person, right? And if you become a person, right, we all people, right, that's just better for you, because when they make decisions about that department, well, I know Slide, man. I don't know, man. I know we got to do some cutting or something, but I'm going to keep Slide on his team. Or you know what? Slide did say you want to be a manager. There's a manager training group that we're going to be a beta tester. Maybe Slide wants to be a part of the beta test. Let's see what right? So then you get yourself into opportunities.
I want to share something here real quick, because as you were talking, full circle to our conversation today, right? Yeah. So I'm looking at you, you're like, I want to be a manager, right? That's what you say right out of the gate, right? And then you describe this ability to connect with executives. So when I talked about the women that I was meeting who were incredibly ambitious, very talented, and it wasn't a matter of needing to lean in more, right? You're like, I'm doing it, right? I'll go up to anybody. I don't care, right? And they're all like, how do you know that person? And it's like, well, because I talked to him, I asked good questions, right? So when you demonstrated that story, it's such a beautiful example of we're not necessarily not ready. This is not imposter syndrome, right? This is not like Sly doesn't have the courage to be able to do these things if he could just work up the courage. It's like, no, he's ready. But the missing piece then is, and this is what I couldn't help but think about when I was listening to you talk, and for so many of the women that I work with, the missing piece is the ask. So then what happens is, what we do is we go from not having those conversations, a lot of people, to the ask. I want a promotion. I want to be on your team. I want more money, right? And then, but we haven't built the relationship and they don't know anything about us or why we're ready, right? And so then it fails. But then the other side is we'll build the relationships, we'll put ourselves out there, but then we kind of do a soft ask. So, for instance, in your thing where, managing this beta team is an idea or whatever, I want you to engage in conversations about, well, what would it take for me to be the VP of this beta team 5 years from now? Not next job. They're not going to give it to you now, but now you're really talking. Now of course, they see you as a manager, senior manager, director, right? Like, of course, they're ready for that. And they'll say yes to that much easier when you talk about what I call your 3X vision, which is how do I become that VP, right? And then they're like, ooh, now Sly's talking my language.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah, I think that's something I really.
So that's for you, everybody listening. But it was just such a beautiful example of you being so courageous, right? It's not a matter of courage, and for a lot of leaders, not just about like more, like get in front. Once we've done the get in front, now we have to ask ourselves, how can I do that better, right? Like, let's just turn it up a notch. And that's when the pieces, like, I'll be talking to you next year. You'll be like, oh, Stacy. Oh, Stacey, let me tell you what's happened in this last year.
That's great. That's just, I think what you said. How do you get better at doing the quality of those conversations? And that's another conversation in itself. But it kind of sets us perfect for the next question. How can someone build relationships with their leadership team within their company or external from their company?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the willingness to reach out to people and to schedule those. So I have a process that I teach called 15-minute ally meetings. And basically what we're doing is we're recreating the bumps in the hallway, the water cooler conversations that we used to have before Zoom meetings. And we're really doing it on our terms, because even if we're in person in the office and those types of bumps in the hallway and casual conversations, or going up to somebody after an all hands and actually meeting them face to face, even if that's happening, what we're not doing is the follow-ups. And so 15-minute ally meetings are regular conversations with your executive team, with different leaders, not necessarily about what you're working on, but just engaging in these more higher level, like you just gave that most beautiful example. Asking a really solid question of an executive is going to have them look at you a little bit differently. And we're keeping them short. So these aren't like hour-long mentor conversations. These are really short quips, getting in front of somebody on a regular basis who's at like your boss's level, right? So really thinking about who are those people in my organization that I'd love to meet with very regularly and quick. So it values their time, and then they probably get a lot out of it, just like this person that you met with after the all hands, and they're like, nobody's ever asked me that question, right?
And I think that's great. The duration, that's something that took me a while to get the hang of, but I remember when I first started at Microsoft, the VP just took over our business unit. And I sent them a message, and I'm like, hey, I saw you get promoted just recently, and it would be great if I could have 15 minutes of your time, right? And I was like, let's have some questions. See, like, yeah, it's gonna take a couple of weeks. I'm still getting acclimated. So 3 months later, we had the conversation. But I came with my questions, and I practiced it to ask it in 12 minutes, and to give him 3 minutes back, so he can be prepared to get to where he need to go to next. And he was so appreciative. Like, hey, Sly, this is great. Let's get an update in 3 months and see what you did. Like, what did you do with the information? Right. And even now, he left the company. And then I sent him a message like, hey, such and such. Thanks for that. I know you met with me a little while ago. Just wanted to say, I hope you're doing well in your role. Did have some quick questions for you. So if you got some time, I would love to have a quick 10-minute call, because I know your time is precious. You're like, anyone, if you're out there, 10 minutes, most people will give you 10 minutes. But when you got that 10 minutes, you got to make sure, why are they there? What's in it for them, right? What's in it for them? What do you want to know? You can start off, what's the story? But you can get a lot of that story from LinkedIn probably. So ask questions that you can't get on LinkedIn or through an interview. Like, I look for YouTube videos. I look for news postings on the websites. Things I can't get there. then I ask those questions, right? And then if you do that, that will help you out a lot when it turns to building these relationships because they people, right? And find ways inside your organization, whether through like I've been a part of like the Women in Tech board team. So I remember I did a Women in Tech negotiation, and I was able to get the VP, two corporate VPs, and then their manager on the call. It took 6 months of planning to get it there because they were like, "Who are you and why are you contacting us?" And then the team was like, "You should only aim for one. Getting three is going to be too hard." And I'm like, so I had all three like executive teams talking to each other, right? And we had like 1,000 people show up for it, right? And people loved it, so it was a great thing, right? And the cool thing I think about that situation, it was just how much prep time you had to do, the things I had to prepare talk tracks for people. Then I had a whole mini team, so if anything went wrong during the day, I could focus on being the host, and then the team could take care of stuff. But again, I share that story to share is I created an event that I could lead. And right.
Yes.
So just get creative, right? Find ways. And if you don't have that, so some of the people I meet they're better at operational than creating. So you align yourself with someone who's a creator, because most of the time the creator ain't good with operations, right? Like I'm not good. That's why I made sure the lady who I align with, she needs all the I's and the T's crossed. In this scenario, we need that for the executives because they're looking for the grammar mistakes. They're looking for the missed comma. They're looking for you not to be on time for a minute, and they're not going to show up. Or if they do, they're not going to give you good feedback, right? So that's to be some tips from my end is just know who you are, right? I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at, and I align my team. I like to call my internal board of directors to those things. So,
yeah.
So I guess this goes right now. This is the next question that's kind of lines up perfectly. I keep saying that because, man, it's just like I'm giving you volleyballs and you're just hitting the home runs with it. So next question is why trust is key to advancing your career. And trust, I know it's a short word, but that is what that's what it runs on, right? If I put you in the management role, can I trust you to get things done, right? Trust even as a senior individual contributor, right? So from your perspective, what does that really mean? And how does that really help someone ascend in their career?
Oh my goodness. So I just thought of a Harvard Business Review article talking about what are the key factors that a CEO's value in their executive team. So you could imagine this is a CEO in their C-suite executives, right? But it really parallels to everything that we're talking about today at whatever level you're on. And the key factors were all foundational in this word trust. And most of them had to do with words like alignment, culture, responsibility, right? So when we look at those C-suite roles, the idea is that you're good at your job, right? Like that we're not building trust, that we know what we're doing, right? And so at that point, when you start to transition into those executive roles, you're looking at how can I build trust in these other areas, show them that I'm aligned and understand where the organization's headed, show them that I'm aligned with the culture, that I really know about the culture and that I'm going to make decisions accordingly, show them that I can make difficult decisions and go against the status quo, that I'm willing to, knowing all of this, that I'm not a yes person, that I'm also going to push back, right? These are the qualities that CEOs want from their executive team. They want that discourse. They want to have that conversation with their executive team. That is how they quote unquote trust them. So how do we do that? Do we walk around with a big flag and be like, I can be trusted. I can be trusted. No, it's just the opposite. If you're walking around all the time talking about how great you are, nobody's going to trust you, right? Like they're not going to trust you if you have to have a flag up that says, but can't you see how awesome I am? And like all these things. It's like, no, but the way that they trust you is what's called in between conversations, right? So, not necessarily even how smart you were in your team meeting that the VP happened to have been listening to, right? That's not necessarily going to build that trust. But the thing is after the meeting, when you deliver something really smart and you're like proud of it and you're proud of this project and you saw that VP was in the meeting and you circle around with them and you say, hey, can we schedule a 10 or 15-minute conversation? I'd love to follow up and hear from you how you think it went. Do you think we're headed in the right direction? Here's some additional thoughts I have about what I'm working on. Ooh, now that VP starts to trust you, right? So that's the one piece is like, really, how do we build that trust? We have to think about it. It's everything in between the meetings. It's not in the meeting itself. In between the meetings is also the 15-minute ally meetings though, right? That's an in-between type meeting. It's a meeting that's an in-between meeting. It's like so funny that way, right? But it is true. And then the other thing is that when we get this advice of what is it going to take to get a promotion, right? So you get to your performance review and they're like, all right, you're doing all the right things. But what you don't have is exposure to the executive team. And that comes up a lot. So your boss cannot be the only person that likes you, that knows how great you are, that advocates for you, that wants you to be promoted per se, right? And so when we start to build relationships with other people and have that trust, so that then when our boss does say, hey, Sly, we need to give him a promotion, now's his time, everybody in that room goes, oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely, right? And so as opposed to, wait, who's Sly? What's going on? Like, tell us more, right? No, we can't start from that place. So that's why trust is important. And then the first piece was, how do we do it?
That's great. Yeah. And I think one thing is duration too, right? You can't trust someone the first time you meet them, right? It takes time. So what questions are you asking? What are you asking from this VP, right? Because naturally they're probably going to be on board, because when you in those leadership roles, you get people trying to progress too, and they know that, right? So I think this was taking that time to be deliberate, and right, and then in between meetings, and making sure that timelines, deadlines, the fundamental things, you're not gonna get a pat on your back, right? Those are just the things you just got to do.
Yeah, you just got to do. We know you can do that, right? Like, so, but you can't slack off there.
Yeah.
Just do it, but know that doesn't always equal promotion. I say a promotion is not a reward for your hard work, right? Yeah. You might get a little pat on the back, but that's as far as it's going to go.
You also got to know where you want to go, right? I find in life sometimes you might get passed up for a promotion that you think that you was the best person for. What do you do next is the determining factor. Do you wait? Do you go to another team? Right? But it's your career. So really having a good idea of what happens if that happens in that situation. Because I've been in certain times where I'm like, man, I'm perfect. Oh man, Stacy's been here a little bit longer than me. Man, Stacy's been doing this a little bit better than me too. She's gonna probably get it first. I don't see any more roles on this team. Oh man, I'm gonna have to move because I wanna move up too, because I still think I can get this done. Let me go look for somewhere else to go. Let's start building relationships before I need those relationships in other departments, right? So then people know, like, hey, Sly is, he's really great for this manager role. I know you don't have one on your team, but you could come over here, right? So just being able to pivot, because sometimes you get stuck waiting, and it might not happen. And like we said before, it might be those foundational skills, but what are you doing beyond that? What are you doing to make your life easier, right? So, but anyway, that's a good conversation. And something I like to talk about is a tagline that I use everywhere. I use it with my kids. I use it with my person, with just me as a person, with the business. It's always be learning, right? So I always like to ask a question. Can you share a few of your favorite books or podcasts? And I try to share at least one book that I'm reading right now. This is a shameless plug. This is Stacy's book. She got me. I'm trying to get to that executive suite, so I had to add it to the rotation. So, that's just something I'm doing. And one last book I'll show before I don't steal too much. This is the book I was talking about earlier, is Finance for Managers. It's just skills that I usually don't use that much. Learning EBITDA, cash flow statements, budgets, just learning the jargon that they talk about within the C-suite. Because they're not talking about hey man, Microsoft Defender, the new feature just came out. Where do I click to turn it on? They're not doing that right now, right? They're talking about, what's the business, what's the head count, what's the growth potential of it? How do we meet more customers? Do we need to go in new industries? What's affecting the cash flow statement? If it's a public company, how does that look to the public, right? All these things that I don't talk about every day that I
Hmm.
need to learn. So I got to learn a little bit, just the basics. I don't want to be a finance VP of finance or something, right? But I need to understand the conversation. But that's just a few of my books. What's yours, Stacey?
Yeah. So the first one that came to mind is a book called Ask for More by Alexandra Carter. Alexandra is a negotiation trainer for the United Nations and a phenomenal woman. And this is one of the only books on negotiation that has been written by a woman. And she said this, she goes by the name Alex, but she was like, I wanted to make sure everybody knew that I was a woman and a powerful woman at that. And I know how to negotiate. And the thing that I love about this book is that it's 10 questions to negotiate better. And that's what I'm finding in these 15-minute ally meetings is that people are, if you just ask a really solid question, then you're going to build that trust. You're going to engage in a conversation. And so she shows you questions that you can ask that actually set you up to negotiate better. So one is like you're understanding what the other person cares about, right? You're listening and you're like, okay, I'm asking really good questions. So I'm teasing out what matters to them. So then I can negotiate better. But also because we're doing less proving ourselves and less showing and more engaging in conversation. And so that book, hands down, definitely check it out. It's so easy to just follow and like implement this week. And then the other thing that came to mind was a podcast, which is by John Acuff, which is All It Takes Is a Goal. And John Acuff, there's a book that he's written several amazing books, but one in particular, which is called Soundtracks, is all about those thoughts, those voices in our head, those negative thoughts that we have on a regular basis. And if we could just change the channel a little bit, we could change our entire life. And so he's incredibly pithy, motivational. You can just listen to him speak and get fired up in like 10 minutes time. So I definitely recommend putting that in your ear.
That's great. Those two great books. I can't wait to add them to I'm gonna add it to my book list. And but I got to give you some promotions. So where can they find your book?
Yeah. So Promotions Made Easy is the name of the book. You can purchase it everywhere. My website is stacymayer.com. I also have a link to the book and the different reviews and what's being said about it. But really, the whole purpose of the book was to make promotions very easy for you. So again, full circle, you're really great at what you do. You're amazing. You're engaging. You're courageous. You're doing all the things. Maybe there's one sentence, one line, one conversation away from that next promotion. And so it's really literally a step-by-step guide to show you how to get and to engage in those higher level conversations to actually get your next promotion. And so the whole point is like, how can we make promotions easy? Because we didn't touch on this, but talk about my passion. Your promotion to manager, like when I meet you, Sly, you being
Yeah.
a manager is not your legacy. Like, come on, like you are meant for so many big things.
Yeah.
So let's just get you promoted to manager so we can stop thinking about that and like have you be director, senior director, whatever you want to be. And so then that way you can get to work really impacting the organization and doing the work that you really want to be doing. So that's the whole point of Promotions Made Easy. Another thing is I have a podcast. So I know all your listeners love podcasts and I'd love for them to check it out and see what they think, but it's called Women Changing Leadership. And if you go on there, you're going to hear me having conversations with, yes, women who are changing the face of their leadership table, but really to give you the tools, again, that I talk about in my book to get you into those higher level positions. To have that voice, though, when we think about it, if we have to engage in 15-minute ally conversations and when we have to proactively build trust to get that position, we're not going to just get promoted and then be like thrown to the wolves. because we've built those relationships. We have people to call on. So when we don't understand something, when we are confused, when we don't know how to speak the language, we have that personal board of directors around us. And so that's really the focus of Women Changing Leadership, is how do we not only get the promotions, but bring our voice into the conversation so that when we get there, we're not just like having to continue to prove ourselves over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I think something you touched on that was really brilliant is that board of directors and those. I feel like when those times when you go on this, you challenge, you're trying to do something new, right? Sometimes you're gonna get in a situation where you don't know how to solve the problem. But if you spend the time in building relationships, you can reach out to those mentors. Even if you don't have the strong, just ask a question. Like, hey, Stacy, I'm trying to get into the executive role. Now that we have the relationship, this is where I'm having trouble with. Any tips? Oh, slide.
Yeah.
You just got to do this, right? I say that to say is you got to build that on the road, because what happens, I find, is you get there, you're gonna run into a wall, right? It's like when I became a director of product marketing, I didn't have a director of product marketing to call on. So when
Right.
I ran in there, I'm like, all right, I'm building out all these tools, I'm killing it. I'm my manager upset. Well, you ain't building the blocks to build your team underneath you, right? I didn't have someone to ask that question then, right? But now I know. So but anyway, you're gonna learn that as you go on. So I thought that was pretty phenomenal that she said there. So go check that podcast out, because I know I am. I'm gonna make sure I add it to the show notes. If you're listening to it, and if you're watching this on YouTube, it will be in the description also. And before I let you go, because Stacey, you're a breath of fresh air, I could talk to you for the whole day. How can the audience contact you?
Well, the best thing to do is to follow me on social media, and
Yeah.
you can DM me. I answer all my own DMs. So LinkedIn, it's Stacy Mayer. And then on Instagram, I am at Corporate Badass.
What? Mic
Yeah.
drop. Well, until next time, Stacy and Sly Gittens are out. Peace.